Evan was closing his small repair shop on the edge of the quiet human settlement when he heard a strange cry coming from the dark street outside. It was not a human cry and not an animal cry. It was something soft yet sharp, like someone begging the night to show mercy. He froze with his hand on the light switch and waited for the cry again. When it came a second time, it was weaker than before and full of fear. He stepped outside slowly and looked around. The street was empty except for rainwater running down the broken pavement. The cold wind pushed against his jacket and carried a scent he did not know. He walked a little further, and then he saw her, an alien woman standing under the flickering streetlight holding a small child in her arms. Her clothes were torn, her skin marked with bruises, and her silver eyes were filled with panic. For a moment, Evan thought she would run, but instead, she looked at him as if he was the only safe thing left on the planet. She took one shaking step toward him, and then another. Her knees buckled, and she fell in front of him. The child in her arms whimpered. Softly as rain soaked both of them, Evan rushed to help her stand, but she held up a hand, begging him to listen first. Her voice trembled like she had been holding her fear for too long. She whispered the words that froze him in place. "Take me as your concubine, please. Just protect my daughter." Evan did not understand what she meant at first. He had heard alien cultures had strange customs, but he never imagined a royal-looking woman would kneel before a human stranger in the rain. He looked down and noticed the broken pieces of a golden crown tied to her belt. They glimmered under the weak streetlight, revealing a truth he could hardly believe. She was not just any alien woman. She was a princess. But why would a princess beg a human for protection? Why would she offer herself like that? And why did she look more terrified of going back than of dying right there? Before Evan could ask anything, the ground trembled under his feet. A distant roar rolled across the sky, shaking loose dust from the roofs around them. The princess gasped and held her daughter tightly, as if the sound alone could rip the child away from her. The girl hid her face against Evan's leg, as if he was someone she already trusted more than anyone else. Evan looked up at the sky and saw a dark shape passing behind the clouds, something large and slow and searching. He felt his breath catch in his throat. Whatever she was running from was in the air above them, and it was getting closer. The princess tried to stand, but her legs were too weak. Evan helped her up and guided her into the shelter of his shop. She reached out for his hand with desperation. He had never seen in any creature her fingers cold and trembling, her voice barely a whisper, as she kept repeating the same plea. "Protect my daughter. Protect her, please. Human, please." Inside the shop, the child clung to Evan's jacket, her tiny hands gripping with surprising strength. When he knelt to her level, she stared at him with wide violet eyes that were full of fear, but also full of trust. She asked one small question that hit Evan deeper. "Than anything else, will you throw us away?" Evan felt something hard twist inside his chest. He shook his head and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, hoping she would feel safe, even though he himself had no idea what danger he was stepping into. He looked back at the princess, who had collapsed into a chair, breathing hard. Her royal aura was still there, but it was cracked and dim like a broken star. He wanted answers, but he knew this was not the moment to ask. The roar in the sky was returning louder than before. The shop ceiling shook lightly, and the lights flickered. The child ran into Evan's arms without thinking. The princess stared at him with tears, filling her eyes as if the universe had pushed her into a corner with no escape except him. Evan looked at both of them and made a decision he had no right to make and yet could not avoid. He would help them, whatever they were running from. He would stand between it and this terrified mother and child. He did not know that this single night would pull him into a war between worlds. He did not know that saving one princess would change his life forever. The only thing he knew was this: no one kneels in the rain with a child in her arms unless she has truly lost everything, and no human with a heart walks away from. That scene inside the small repair shop, the flickering lights made the shadows dance on the walls, creating a heavy tension that pressed on the princess like a weight she could no longer carry. Evan brought a thick blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, but she did not relax. Even for a moment, her eyes kept darting to the windows. As if she expected soldiers to burst through them at any second, the little girl sat on the floor close to Evan, gripping his sleeve. As if it was the only anchor she had left in the universe, Evan knelt in front of the princess and asked her gently who she was running from and why she had fallen in front of him, begging for protection. For a moment, she did not speak, her breath shaking as she tried to control her fear. Then she pulled the blanket tighter and slowly exposed the side of her neck, where a thin, glowing mark burned softly under her skin. It was shaped like a falling star, but broken in the middle. Evan did not know the meaning, but the princess looked at it with deep shame. She said the mark was the royal symbol of exile used only on traitors and impure bloodlines. Her voice cracked when she said the word impure. She seemed ready to break again. She explained that she had once lived inside the golden halls of the Flame Empire, a civilization ruled by strict traditions and cruel honor. She had been a respected princess trained to become a leader of her people, but everything changed the day her daughter was born. The girl should have carried the royal flame, a natural energy that came from their bloodline, but the child was born without it. To the empire, that meant she was defective, unworthy, unwanted. The princess said her husband, the prince, tried to defend their daughter, but the royal council accused him of weakening the bloodline. They executed him in front of her, and then ordered that the child be removed and disposed of. The princess stood between the guards and her baby, and was punished with the mark of exile. She had to watch helplessly as everyone she once trusted turned their backs on her. Ev listened with growing disbelief. How could a whole empire decide a child should not live just because she was different? How could a mother be punished for protecting her own daughter? Every word the princess spoke fueled the anger building in his chest. She continued telling him that she fled the palace the same night, taking only her daughter and the broken pieces of her crown. She ran across 3 planets hiding from the Empire's hunters, but today they finally tracked her ship. It was destroyed in the sky above the settlement, forcing her and her daughter to eject and land on foot. The moment she saw a human building, she ran toward it, praying someone would help her, even if she had to offer herself in exchange. When Evan asked why she had offered herself to him, her voice dropped. In her culture, a concubine vow was a desperate way for a mother to secure protection for her child. If a protector accepted the vow, the mother and child were bound to him, and enemies would hesitate before attacking. She believed humans were strange creatures who valued possession and loyalty, so she offered the only thing she believed she had left herself. Evan shook his head. Slowly, he told her he did not want ownership or vows or any form of submission. He told her he only wanted her and her daughter to be safe. The girl looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes and moved closer, resting her head on his arm. The princess watched that simple action, and something inside her softened. Suddenly, the shop lights dimmed as a low hum filled the air. The floor vibrated under their feet. The princess grabbed her daughter and whispered in terror that the hunters were close. Evan moved to the door and peeked outside. Strange blue lights swept across the road, scanning every building. 3 tall figures in dark armor moved silently through the rain, their helmets glowing with symbols he could not read. Evan locked the door and told the princess to stay hidden behind the counter. Her daughter clung to her, trembling. Then the knocking began, slow, heavy, deliberate knocking, not like someone asking for help, more like someone warning, "We know you are inside." Evan felt a chill crawl down his spine. He had promised to protect them, but now the hunters were at his door, and he had no idea how far they were willing to go to tear a child from her mother. The heavy knocking echoed through the small repair shop like someone striking a giant drum, and each slow hit made the princess flinch as if lightning touched her skin. Evan stood frozen near the door, trying to breathe steadily, but even he could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. The little girl pressed herself against her mother, hiding her face in the folds of the blanket as the knocking grew harder and sharper, like a heartbeat speeding up. Evan knew he had only seconds before the hunters forced their way in, so he motioned for the princess to crouch behind the tool counter where the shadows were thick and deep. She moved quietly, holding her daughter close, as if she was trying to merge them both into the smallest space possible. Her eyes shone with fear, but also with a strange strength, like she was ready to die if it meant her child survived. The knocking stopped. A silence heavier than the knocking followed, as if the world itself was waiting for something to break. Evan stepped toward the door and pressed his ear against it. He could hear breathing on the other side, but it was not human breathing. It was slow, controlled, and layered, like three voices inhaling at once. Then a voice came from behind the door, speaking in a tone that sounded almost polite, yet dangerous. "We know you sheltered in exile of the Flame Empire. Open the door, human, and step aside." Evan swallowed hard. He did not know alien customs, and he did not know their laws, but he knew the meaning of the word exile, and he knew they were referring to the princess. His hand tightened on the metal wrench he had picked up, even though he knew it was useless against armored hunters still. He held it as if it gave him a little courage. The princess shook her head, slowly pleading, with her eyes begging him not to open the door. Evan nodded to her, then turned again to face the door. The shop lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed as the hunters activated some kind of scanning field. A faint blue glow seeped under the door, crawling like mist. The little girl let out a tiny gasp. One of the hunters outside heard it. The breathing stopped, then the voice returned, colder than before. "We heard the child." The door handle twisted. Evan stepped forward and held it in place, using his whole weight, but the force pulling from the other side was inhuman. The princess rose slightly, ready to run out and sacrifice herself, but Evan shook his head again, signaling her to stay hidden. The door opened a crack. A tall, armored figure pushed one blade through the gap, testing the room as if expecting an attack. Evan pushed harder, trying to close the door, but the hunter was far stronger. The blade lifted towards his face. That was the moment Evan remembered something the princess had said earlier about their culture. She mentioned a sacred oath test used by their warriors. Something ancient, something respected, something no outsider usually dared to invoke without thinking. Evan shouted through the crack, "I demand the right of an oath test." The door froze. The blade stopped inches from his face. A long, tense silence filled the room. The hunter outside spoke again, but now his voice carried shock. "A human requests an oath test. You do not know its meaning." Evan did not know it, but he understood one thing. If he did not do something right now, the princess would walk out and surrender herself. So he repeated the words louder. "I demand an oath test." The door closed. Whispering sounds passed between the hunters outside, like they were debating. Evan waited, shaking quietly. The princess stared in disbelief, unable to understand why he would call such a dangerous ritual. She whispered softly that no human had ever survived one. Then the door opened fully, and three tall, armored hunters stepped inside. Their helmets glowed faintly with symbols that looked like embers floating in water. The leader pointed at Evan with a long staff and said, "You have invoked ancient law, and we will honor it. You will be taken to our vessel for the test if you pass the exile, and her child gain temporary protection. If you fail, both will be taken, and you will be erased." The princess crawled out from hiding, unable to stay silent. She begged them to take her instead and leave the human alone, but the hunters ignored her completely. Their law had been invoked, and now nothing could stop the ritual. Two hunters grabbed Evan by the arms. He did not fight, he did not run. He looked back at the princess and the little girl, both trembling. He nodded once, a nod that meant, "I made a promise. I will not abandon you." The hunters pulled him out into the rain. The sky above glowed with red symbols as their ship descended, preparing to take him away. The princess fell to her knees again. But this time she was not begging for her own safety. She was begging the universe not to let the human die for choosing her. The hunters dragged Evan through the rain toward their massive ship resting at the edge of the settlement, its black metal surface pulsing with strange red light that seemed alive. The closer he got, the more the air trembled around him, like the ship itself was breathing. His boots slid on the wet ground, but he did not pull away. Each step reminded him why he had chosen this path: a terrified mother hiding behind a tool counter, a tiny girl holding his sleeve like it was the last safe thing she had in the universe. The ship opened with a hiss. A staircase of glowing stone unfolded. As if summoned by an invisible hand, the hunters pushed Evan forward, and he walked inside, where the air felt heavy and warm. Like he had stepped into a living creature instead of a machine. The walls shimmered with symbols that shifted and twisted like flames, trying to form words. They brought him into a circular chamber with a deep pit in the center. Above the pit floated a massive ring of metal carved with ancient markings that glowed brighter every second one hunter spoke, with a tone that carried no emotion. "This is the Chamber of the Oath. If you endure the ritual, you gain protector rights. If you break, you will vanish beneath the flame." Evan looked into the pit. It was filled with a swirling energy that looked like molten fire and liquid light mixed together. Heat rose from it, making sweat prick his skin. He had no idea how anyone could endure this test, let alone a human. Still, he stayed silent and stepped forward. The hunters surrounded him, forming a triangle. Their leader lifted his staff and struck it once against the ground. The entire chamber shook. The ring above descended slowly, lowering itself until it hovered just above Evan's shoulders. It radiated a heat stronger than anything he had ever felt. The leader spoke again. "The test has 3 stages. Endurance truth will fail any, and your body will collapse into the flame." Evan swallowed, but did not back away. He remembered the little girl asking if he would throw them away too. He remembered the princess falling in the rain, begging for mercy no one else ever gave. Those memories filled him with a strength he could not explain. Stage 1 began. The ring suddenly ignited with bright red energy. Heat slammed into Evan like a wave, and his legs buckled. He gritted his teeth and stood firm. Every part of his skin felt like it was burning from the inside. The hunters watched silently, expecting him to collapse within seconds. The hunters exchanged confused glances. A human should not have lasted even a moment. Stage 2 began. The chamber darkened. Voices filled the air, whispering memories he never wanted to hear. All his regrets, all his losses, all his fears. Voices of people he had failed, voices reminding him of times he believed he was useless. The chamber tried to break his mind, tried to crack his sense of truth. Evan shook as the whispers dug into him. He felt himself slipping. Then he remembered the princess clutching his arm in desperation. He remembered how she had apologized for asking him for help because no one else ever listened. He lifted his head and shouted into the darkness, "My truth is, I protect them." That is all. The whispers shattered. The chamber glowed again. Stage 3 began. The ring rose higher, then slammed downward, releasing a surge of pressure that nearly crushed Evan to his knees. This was the test of will. Only those with unbroken resolve survived it. Energy lashed around him like invisible chains, pulling him down, pulling him inward, trying to extinguish him. The hunters leaned forward. This was the stage where even trained warriors sometimes died. Evan fell to one knee. The fire burned his nerves, his vision blurred. His muscles trembled like they would tear apart. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. Then he heard a faint memory. The princess whispering, "Please protect my daughter." Her voice fueled him. He pushed back against the crushing force. His knee lifted, his spine straightened. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet again. The chamber exploded with light. The hunters stepped back. Their leader lowered his staff in disbelief. The ring dimmed and floated away. The pit in the center calmed. The test was complete. The leader spoke. "A human has passed the oath. You gain temporary protector rights by ancient law. We cannot harm those under your shelter." Evan collapsed to the floor, breathing hard but alive. He had survived a test that no human should have survived, but somewhere deep inside the ship, an alarm began to echo. More hunters were arriving. Stronger, higher ranked, and none of them cared for ancient law. The real danger was only beginning. Evan lay on the floor of the oath chamber, breathing heavily as the heat around him began to fade, leaving his skin trembling, and his muscles shaking like exhausted wires. The hunters stood in a circle around him, staring with a mixture of shock and confusion. None of them had believed a human could pass the ancient ritual, yet here he was, alive, swaying, but standing. The leader of the hunters lowered his staff and spoke in a tone that carried reluctant respect. "You have protector rights granted by the oath. No one under your shelter may be touched." Evan barely heard the words. His mind was on the princess and her daughter alone, hidden somewhere in his small shop, praying for his return. He pushed himself up, using the wall for support, his breath uneven, his vision spinning. Still, he found strength because he had promised them he would not abandon them. Before he could ask what came next, deep alarm rippled through the chamber. Red lights swept across the walls, and the ship shook slightly, as if something massive had arrived outside. The hunters stiffened. One of them whispered a word that made the others tense. Enforcers. Unlike hunters, enforcers were higher-ranked warriors who did not follow the same honorable structure. They served the empire with absolute obedience and cared nothing for tradition or protector laws. If they were here, it meant the empire had taken personal notice of the princess's escape. The leader turned sharply toward the exit. "The oath is complete. We cannot touch the exile or her child, but enforcers do not honor old laws. If they decide to purge, they will remove all obstacles, including you." Evan felt the weight of those words settle like a stone on his chest. He asked how much time he had. The leader hesitated, as if surprised a human would still care about time and not run. Then he answered, minutes. That meant the princess and her daughter had almost no chance, unless he reached them before the enforcers arrived. Evan forced his shaking legs to move. He dragged himself up the stairs toward the ship entrance, each step feeling like he carried a mountain outside. The rain was heavier than before, and lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the settlement. A massive shadow descended through the clouds, a royal cruiser far larger than the hunter's ship. Its black surface reflected the storm like a living creature, and its engines hummed with unbearable pressure. That was an enforcer ship. Evan ran through the mud, slipping, nearly falling, but refusing to stop. Every time he staggered, he reminded himself of the little girl gripping his sleeve and asking him not to throw them away. He reminded himself of the princess kneeling in the rain, offering herself in fear and desperation. No one should be hunted for protecting their child. No one should be discarded by their own empire. He reached his shop and burst through the door. The princess jumped to her feet, her eyes wide with terror. Her daughter ran to Evan and wrapped her arms around him, sensing his exhaustion and fear. The princess touched Evan's face, gently, shocked by the burns and marks left by the oath chamber. She whispered, "What have they done to you?" Evan shook his head. He could not explain the test. There was no time. He told her the truth, in the simplest way. "The hunters cannot take you anymore, but stronger ones are coming." The princess froze. Her hands tightened around her child. She whispered one name, the way someone might whisper death itself. "Enforcers." Before Evan could respond, the entire building shook. A beam of golden light swept across the street, scanning for life. The enforcer cruiser had begun its purge pattern. The hunters outside stepped back, watching, helplessly bound by their honor to the oath, yet unable to stop that stronger force descending from the empire. The princess looked at Evan, her eyes filled with guilt. She said quietly that he should leave her, that he had done enough, that he should not die because of her cursed fate. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke with a steady voice, fueled by something deeper than courage. "I told you I protect you, both of you. That will not change." The little girl buried her face against his chest. Shaking, the princess covered her daughter's head and whispered a silent prayer. Outside, the wind howled as the enforcer ship opened its lower bay, revealing a blinding core of golden fire. Evan looked out through the cracked window. He knew the hunters had honor. He knew the enforcers had none. He knew they were coming not to capture, but to erase. He took a single breath, a breath that held fear and determination. Then the sky turned gold as the enforcers descended, ready to tear apart anything that stood between them and the princess, and Evan stepped forward anyway. The golden light, pouring from the enforcer cruiser, washed over the entire settlement like a rising sun that carried only destruction and judgment. Evan felt its heat through the thin walls of his repair shop, and he knew this was no simple search. This was the kind of operation meant to erase whole bloodlines. The princess held her daughter against her chest, trembling with the weight of her fate. Outside, the hunters stood still, watching the sky with unspoken fear, because even they knew their honor meant nothing against the Empire. As highest authority, a deep voice boomed across the storm, louder than thunder and filled with authority that demanded obedience. Princess of the Flame Empire, reveal yourself or your protector, and this entire settlement will be purged. The princess gasped and fell to her knees, not out of weakness, but out of shock. She recognized the voice, her own mother, the Empress ruler of the Flame Empire. A woman who valued honor more than life itself. A woman who had ordered the execution of her own son-in-law. A woman who had branded her daughter a disgrace.
Oh.
The little girl looked up, confused, not understanding why her mother looked ready to collapse. She asked softly, "Who is that?" The princess held her daughter tighter and whispered the answer with pain heavy in her voice. "Your grandmother." The cruiser descended, lower its engines, roared like ancient beasts waking from slumber. A massive holographic projection formed above the settlement, showing the Empress's stern face, cold, emotionless, carved like stone. Her eyes scanned the ground, searching for the daughter she had thrown away. Evan stepped outside into the rain, standing in front of his shop. The princess tried to stop him, but he gently pulled free and faced the gigantic golden projection. He had no weapon, he had no power. He had only the promise he made and the will that brought him through the oath test. The Empress's gaze fell on him, a human. She spoke again with a voice dripping with disdain. "You shelter in exile. You protect tainted blood. Stand aside." Evan did not move. He lifted his head and met her gaze. Even though she towered above him like a goddess of fire, the Empress's lips curled into a thin, cruel smile. "You cannot shield what the Empire has rejected. Surrender the child and her mother. You will receive a swift death." The princess ran to his side, her knees sinking into the mud as she cried out to the sky, "Mother, please stop. We are no threat. We only want freedom." The Empress turned her gaze toward her daughter, and the temperature of the very air seemed to drop. "You forfeited your place the moment you defended the defective child. Honor must be restored with your death and hers." The little girl clung to her mother, not understanding the words, but feeling the hatred behind them. Evan felt something ignite inside him, a heat that did not come from the cruiser, a fury deeper than fear. He stepped in front of the princess, shielding both her and the child. With his own body, the Empress raised an eyebrow, as if amused by a small animal showing its teeth. "You would stand against me?" Human Evan answered with a steady voice that surprised even him. "I will not let you take them." The Empress leaned forward slightly. "And who are you to challenge the Flame Empire?" Before Evan could speak, the princess placed her hand over his chest, near her heart. Her eyes burned with courage he had not seen before. She whispered an ancient phrase in her own language, a forbidden vow. Her skin glowed faintly as golden lines spread across her arms, like living fire. The hunters gasped, recognizing the ritual instantly, a royal binding pact, a vow that tied her fate to Evan's. The Empress's eyes widened. "For the first time you dare perform the forbidden pact with a human." The princess squeezed Evan's hand. In their culture, the pact meant this: if she died, he died. If he lived, she lived. No royal warrior could strike one without killing both. It was the ultimate rebellion, the ultimate declaration. The Empress's voice shook with rage. "Do you truly choose this primitive creature over your own empire?" The princess lifted her chin. "I choose the one who chose us." The cruiser engines flared with growing fury. Thunder rolled across the sky. The Empress glared at Evan as if seeing him for the first time. "Very well, protector. If you claim them, you inherit their enemies." The golden projection vanished. The sky darkened. The cruiser began to charge its weapons. The princess whispered Evan's name in fear. The little girl hid behind him, and he stood firm like a man who had already made peace with destiny. The Empire had drawn its line, and Evan had stepped across it. The sky crackled with burning gold as the Enforcer cruiser charged its main cannon, preparing to erase everything beneath it and silence the shame the Empire believed The princess had created Evan stood in front of the princess and her daughter, his arms spread wide, even though he knew he was nothing compared to the power hovering above them. The wind whipped across the settlement, throwing dust and rain into his face, but he did not blink, he did not step back, he did not surrender. Behind him, the princess held her daughter close, her own skin glowing with the faint light of the royal binding pact she had invoked. She knew what she had done. She had tied her fate to a human, a choice no royal had ever made in the history of the Flame Empire. A choice that shattered laws older than any living being. The hunters watched from a distance, frozen between fear and awe, realizing they were witnessing an act that would echo across galaxies. No one, no warrior, no ruler, no scholar could predict what would happen next. The Empress appeared once more as a massive golden projection, her expression colder than frozen stone. Her voice shook the ground as she addressed Evan. Human, you stand between an empire and its honor. Make your final choice. Step aside and live, or defy me and be erased. Evan felt the princess grip the back of his shirt. Shaking slightly, he could feel her fear, not for herself, but for her daughter, and for him. The little girl hid behind his legs, clutching his clothes with small, trembling fingers. He took a breath that felt heavier than the world itself. He thought of every moment that led him hear the cry in. The rain, the princess kneeling before him, the child asking if he would throw them away. The oath test, the vow, the danger, the fear, and the strange, powerful feeling inside him that told him protecting them was the first truly right thing he had done in years. He looked up at the Empress and spoke with a voice that carried through the rain like a beacon. I choose them. Silence deeper than any storm fell across the settlement. The Empress stared at him as if she had been slapped. A human had openly defied the Flame Empire. A human had rejected her absolute authority. A human had accepted the princess and her daughter, knowing full well what it meant. Her voice rose again, trembling not with fear, but with pure royal rage. Then you choose war. You choose exile. You choose death. Before she could order the attack, the princess stepped beside Evan, her hand sliding into his as the packed lines on her skin blazed brighter. She raised her chin and faced the Empress. With a strength she had forgotten she possessed. Mother, your laws abandoned me, but this human did not. He gave me what the Empire never offered: dignity, safety, hope. The Empress narrowed her eyes. You speak as if a human could replace your birthright. The princess answered with a steady voice. He did not replace it, he restored it. The hunters dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by the power of her words. Even they understood what this moment meant. By speaking openly against the Empress, the princess had broken the chains of her exile, and by standing with her, Evan had become something unheard of. A human protector recognized by ancient oath, the Empress raised her hand to unleash the final strike, but the pact flared again. A golden shield of energy formed around Evan, the princess, and the child. The cruiser's cannon fired a beam of blinding fire, shot downward, but it split. Into the moment it touched the shield, veering off into the sky, gasps rose from every warrior present. Even the Empress herself stepped back in shock. The ancient pact had awakened, a power the Empire had not seen in centuries. A power that only formed when a vow was made out of pure truth and pure sacrifice. The kind of vow the Empire had forgotten. The Empress's voice cracked for the first time. Impossible. The princess held Evan's hand tighter. Her daughter peeked up from behind him, her small eyes shining with hope. Evan felt warmth spread through him, as if the pact recognized his resolve and accepted him fully. The Empress realized she could not kill them without breaking the foundation of her own empire. She could not strike a protector chosen by a royal pact. Not even she was above that law. Her projection flickered, her voice lowered. Human, your life from this moment will be hunted by every force loyal to me. If you protect them, you become an enemy of the throne, Evan answered without hesitation. Then I am ready. The Empress vanished, leaving only storm clouds behind her. The Enforcer cruiser slowly ascended, retreating into the sky, unable to strike again without shattering the oldest royal law. Rain fell softly now, as if the world itself exhaled. The princess collapsed into Evan's arms, trembling. Not with fear, but with overwhelming relief, her daughter hugged both of them, whispering thank you in her tiny voice. Evan wrapped his arms around them, feeling the truth settle into his heart. He had not just saved them, he had chosen them, and they had chosen him. On that stormy night, a single human and an exiled princess changed the destiny of two worlds, and the Empire would never forget the human who stood against its fire and did not burn.